decisions by the OPCW policy organs, and Security Council resolutions. However, as has been previously emphasized, full cooperation by the Syrian Arab Republic with the OPCW Technical Secretariat is essential to closing all outstanding issues. Considering the identified gaps, inconsistencies, and discrepancies that remain unresolved, at this time, the OPCW Technical Secretariat assesses that the declaration submitted by the Syrian Arab Republic still cannot be considered accurate and complete in accordance with the Chemical Weapons Convention. I call upon the Syrian Arab Republic to continue its cooperation with the OPCW Technical Secretariat and respond with urgency to all of the Technical Secretariat's requests. Mr. President, since the last meeting of the Council, the OPCW Technical Fact-Finding Mission, FFM, and the Investigation and Identification Team, IIT, have both released reports under their respective mandates. On 22nd February 2024, the OPCW Technical Secretariat issued a report of the fact-finding mission regarding an incident of alleged use of toxic chemicals as a weapon in Al-Yarmouk on 22nd October 2017. The report concluded that the information obtained and analyzed in line with the FFM's mandate was not sufficient to provide reasonable grounds for the FFM to determine that toxic chemicals were used as a weapon in the reported incident. The FFM is currently preparing upcoming deployments and will report to the Executive Council on the results of its work in due course. The OPCW Technical Secretariat also issued a report on 22nd February 2024 entitled Fourth Report by the OPCW Investigation and Identification Team, pursuant to paragraph 10 of Decision CSS4/December 3, addressing the threat from chemical weapons use, Maria, Syrian Arab Republic, 1st September 2015. In this report, the IIT concluded, on the basis of all information obtained and its analysis, that there are reasonable grounds to believe that on 1st September 2015, during sustained attacks aimed at capturing the town of Maria, units of the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, otherwise known as ISIL, deployed sulfur mustard using one or more artillery guns. The IIT was able to identify a number of 4 individuals as perpetrators, and 2 further ISIL members were identified as the primary drivers of ISIL's chemical weapons program. The Secretary General has shared the IIT report with Council members as document S/2024/200. The IIT will continue its investigations and will issue further reports in due course. Mr. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, as the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs has emphasized on many occasions, any use of chemical weapons is unacceptable. I also echo the Secretary General's call to end impunity for all those who dare to use such weapons, especially against civilians. The absence of accountability for the use of chemical weapons continues to be a threat to international peace and security and a danger to us all. In closing, I urge the members of this Council to unite on this issue and show leadership in demonstrating that impunity in the use of chemical weapons will not be tolerated. The United Nations will continue to support all efforts to uphold the norm against chemical weapons and to relegate these dreadful weapons to history. The UN Office for Disarmament Affairs stands ready to provide whatever support and assistance it can. I thank you very much for your attention.
I thank Mr. Ebo for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Russia, like a number of other colleagues on the Council, has repeatedly said that considering the subject of the Syrian chemical file once every 3 months is more than enough. On this subject, for a long time, we have not seen any developments of the situation on the ground. That is also confirmed by today's briefing by the Deputy High Representative on Disarmament, Adedeji Ebo. And today, on the agenda, we have the latest copy-paste monthly report of the OPCW General Director, Fernando Arias. Of the notable substantive changes, it reflects only the fact that the 26th round of consultations were held between the Syrian authorities and the OPCW Declaration Assessment Team. Moreover, on the 27th of February, the OPCW Technical Secretariat notified the Syrian authorities that 3 outstanding issues under Syria's initial declaration had been resolved. Damascus is providing all of the necessary assistance to the inspections carried out by the organization's representatives. Constructive cooperation is continuing. We feel that our Syrian colleagues will probably tell us about that today themselves. However, we have no doubt that these objective facts will do nothing to alter the tone of today's statements from Western delegations, who request these meetings with a single aim: to trot out their standard anti-Syrian arguments. The OPCW Technical Secretariat, upon the orders of the West, continues to rubber stamp politically biased pseudo-analyses. A clear evidence of that is the publication last week of the report of the fact-finding mission into the incident in Yarmouk camp in the suburbs of Damascus on the 27th of October 2017, and also the report of the so-called investigation and identification team into the incident in Morea on the 1st of September 2015. Both documents were not just another clear confirmation of the bias of the leadership of the OPCW Technical Secretariat, but also, once again, very clearly demonstrated the ineffectiveness of its work. As regards the FFM report, the facts and the timeline of events speak for themselves. The mission's representatives arrived at the scene of the incident in Yarmouk for the first time in December 2017, and the samples taken during subsequent FFM visits to that area were given to the OPCW laboratory only in January 2020. The results of the analysis of those samples by designated laboratories were received by the Technical Secretariat in 2021, but the FFM final report only reached CWC states parties 3 years later in February 2024. And that's even though, according to the provisions of the CWC, the final report into the investigation of cases of the supposed use of chemical weapons, including the results of samples analysis, is supposed to be presented to states parties to the convention no later than 30 days after the conclusion of work on the ground. We regret that we're forced to remind the OPCW Technical Secretariat the fundamental principles of its actions. As regards the report of the illegitimate IIT, we do not intend to go into the details of that. Conclusions as to the responsibility of ISIL for the incident in Morea were no surprise to anyone. The UN OPCW Joint Investigative Mechanism into incidences of the use of chemical weapons in Syria that investigated similar incidents in that area back in 2016 came to the same conclusion, that it was an act of chemical terrorism carried out on the 21st of August 2015. During preparations of the IIT document, it once again demonstrated unacceptable working methods that run counter to the CWC's principles for the investigation of cases of the supposed use of chemical weapons, the procedures for preserving evidence, working with witnesses, and ensuring that the place of incidents are visited, and so on. This has long since ceased causing us any surprise. Western countries who forced through the creation of the IIT in violation of the fundamental principles of the CWC clearly had no interest in an objective, impartial, and good quality work being done by this entity. The only aim of its work was at any cost to blame Syria for episodes of the use of chemical weapons in the absence of any convincing evidence whatsoever. In that context, we would like to repeat the principal position of the Russian Federation. We believe that this team is illegitimate. We do not believe that this team is legitimate. For that reason, we fundamentally have no intention to cooperate with the IIT nor take its findings into account. The Syrian leadership also bears no such obligations. As regards the use of chemical weapons by terrorists, let's not forget a simple fact. The Western Troika back in 2016 blocked all attempts by Russia and China to expand the mandate of the UN OPCW joint mechanism to ISIL-controlled areas of Iraq, where, according to UNITAD reports, chemical weapons were being produced, including mustard gas, as well as preparations being made to use them. It's clear that the job of demonizing the Syrian authorities for the USA and their allies is much more of a priority than countering the risk of weapons of mass destruction being used by terrorist groups. Mr. President, the facts that I've mentioned are far from the only examples of the skyrocketing politicization of the OPCW's work. That organization has long since been a platform for Western countries to advance their narrow mercantile interests, and its technical secretariat has become an obedient instrument to serve those interests. This high-handedness is no longer a surprise to anyone. During the previous meeting on the Syrian chemical file in December 2023, we addressed in detail the adoption during the 28th session by CWC member states in The Hague of recommendations to introduce collective measures against Damascus to prevent the supply of Syria to dual-use chemicals, equipment, and technologies. This step contradicts the CWC and the UN Charter without mentioning the risks that it brings with it in terms of exacerbating an already dire humanitarian situation in Syria. However, do the USA and their allies think about this? Well, it's a rhetorical question. The rules-based order is much more important for them than international law is. We have no doubts that today's meeting will be nothing more than another reason for Western countries to engage in anti-Syrian rhetoric. Theirs is a show performed with well-rehearsed roles, and the discussion of the Syrian chemical file is reminiscent not so much of a play, really, so much as a tired soap opera whose directors are unsuccessfully trying to buoy up long-flagging public interest with absurd and unnatural plot twists. We won't be surprised if, in order to keep this soap opera on the air today, we'll hear more anti-Russian tales and absurd accusations. That's part and parcel of the genre thought up and advanced by Washington and its satellites. We don't intend to play into their hands. Against a backdrop of the work before the Security Council, we believe that meetings such as today's are an irrational use or irrational waste of time and resources, particularly in light of the reluctance of our Western colleagues to discuss something that's awkward for their Middle East ally, that is to say, the subject of Israeli crimes against the civilian population of Gaza. We trust that the delegations that took over the watch in 2024 following this meeting will also draw the necessary conclusions about this. We do have work that we need to do together instead of holding pointless meetings to work through the playbook of a small group of countries. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for the statement. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me, first of all, to congratulate Guyana on the excellent work accomplished during the month of February and to assure you, Mr. President, and your team of our full support for your presidency. I would like to thank the Deputy High Representative for Disarmament Affairs, Mr. Adedeche Ebo, for his presentation. For over a decade, obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention have been repeatedly violated in Syria. A year after the OPCW published a report on the deadly April 2018 attack in Douma, further damning facts are brought to the attention of this Council. The OPCW Investigation and Identification Team's fourth report, published on February 22, concludes that there are reasonable grounds to believe that Daesh units used mustard gas in a series of attacks to capture the northern town of Morea on the morning of September 1, 2015. This chemical weapon, whose use is prescribed by international law, inflicts severe chemical burns to eyes, skin, and mucous membranes. At least 11 people are said to have suffered such symptoms in these attacks, orchestrated according to the OPCW report by Daesh's highest level of command. Switzerland has full confidence in the OPCW. It welcomes the meticulous work, professionalism, and integrity of the IIT. Establishing the facts is crucial to ensuring accountability and preventing future attacks. In this case, the fact that a non-state actor has been designated by the OPCW underlines the need for member states of the CWC to take action against the transfer of chemical weapons goods to illegal recipients. Switzerland supported a decision to this effect at the last OPCW Conference of States Parties in November 2023. We also welcome the recent 26th round of consultations between the OPCW's Declaration Assessment Team and the Syrian government. We call on Syria to continue its cooperation with the OPCW. The provision of conclusive answers to the points that remain unresolved in relation to Syria's initial declaration is one of the conditions for it to regain its rights and privileges as a state party to the Chemical Weapons Convention. Providing these answers on the basis of verifiable, tangible, and scientifically plausible explanations also constitutes an obligation to this Council. Mr. President, Switzerland condemns the use of chemical weapons and calls on all parties to respect their obligations under international humanitarian law. Adopted 12 years ago, Resolution 2118 reflects the firm conviction of the Security Council and the international community that those responsible for the use of chemical weapons in Syria must be held accountable. In this respect, we welcome the formal cooperation between the OPCW and the International Impartial and Independent Mechanism for Syria. The fight against impunity must contribute to ensuring that chemical weapons are never used again by anyone at any time and in any circumstances in Syria or elsewhere in the world. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Director Ebo, for your comprehensive briefing this morning. President, as we heard from Director Ebo this morning, the OPCW's Investigation and Identification Team released its fourth report on the 22nd of February. This latest report attributed responsibility to Daesh for a sulfur mustard attack in Maria on the 1st of September 2015. We commend the continued professionalism and expertise of the IIT, and we condemn this confirmed use of chemical weapons in Syria by Daesh. The UN OPCW Joint Investigative Mechanism and the OPCW have now confirmed 9 uses of chemical weapons by the Assad regime and 4 by Daesh. Any use of chemical weapons by anyone, anywhere, at any time is unacceptable. And we regret that we cannot exclude the possibility of the further use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime or by non-state actors in Syria. President, Syria continues to fail to fulfill its obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention and under this Council's Resolution 2118. As we have said many times in this chamber, the outstanding issues with Syria's initial chemical weapons declaration that Director Ebo covered this morning are not academic. They include the fate of several hundred tons of chemical warfare agents and thousands of chemical munitions. Instability in the region increases the risk of proliferation of chemical weapons to non-state actors. We need to remain focused on the risk that non-state actors develop, acquire, or use chemical weapons. All states should meet their obligations under Resolution 1540 to ensure that appropriate mechanisms are in place to counter the spread of weapons of mass destruction, as well as their means of delivery. President, Syria's obstructive behaviour and failure to declare in full its chemical weapons stockpile gives no grounds for confidence in Syria's handling of the chemicals and precursors that we know it retains. At the Chemical Weapons Convention Conference of State Parties in November 2023, state parties adopted a decision on addressing the threat from chemical weapons use and the threat of future use. Despite the spin that our Russian colleagues attempt to put on this decision, its function was very clear. It recommends that states parties review and enhance domestic measures on the transfer of toxic, dual-use chemicals and materials to Syria. And secondly, it calls on states parties to strengthen cooperation at the OPCW on tackling the threat of chemical weapons use by non-state actors. President, in the week in which Russia has called a Security Council meeting on the NATO intervention in Yugoslavia that took place 25 years ago, it's rich that our Russian colleagues say that these meetings are pointless. Because until Syria cooperates constructively and transparently with the OPCW, until Syria grants unfettered access to the OPCW Declaration Assessment Team, and until Syria fully declares and destroys its chemical weapons, this Council must remain focused on this clear and ongoing threat to international peace and security. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President, and I too thank Director Ebo for his informative briefing. At the outset, I congratulate you, President, on assuming the presidency of the Council. You can count on our full support during this time. We also thank Guyana for steering the work of the Council in a very effective and smooth manner in the month of February. President, Malta continues to support the holding of regular meetings on this file as mandated by Resolution 2118. This resolution, adopted unanimously, established that those responsible for the use of chemical weapons must be held accountable. This is not only a question of justice, but also one of prevention. Effective accountability is necessary to make sure that chemical weapons will never be used again. The use of chemical weapons is unacceptable and completely contrary to the legal norms and standards of the international community. In view of the recent issuance of the fourth IIT report on the use of chemical weapons in Syria, while expressing our continuous support for the IIT's key role in identifying perpetrators, it is crucial for the international community to reiterate its condemnation of chemical weapons use and to ensure that adequate measures are taken. We take note of the holding of the 26th round of consultations between the DAT and the Syrian national authorities last month. While this is a positive step, it is not enough to meet the obligations under the Chemical Weapons Convention and Resolution 2118. In this regard, we look forward to the outcome of these engagements, including the assessment by the Secretariat of the responses of the Syrian Arab Republic regarding the samples collected by the DAT during its deployment in the country. The latest OPCW report clearly states that the declaration submitted by the Syrian Arab Republic still cannot be considered accurate and complete in accordance with the Convention and with Resolution 2111. This is regrettable. We urge the Syrian authorities to provide explanations and documents to resolve outstanding issues, including scientifically plausible and verifiable explanations regarding research and development at certain sites. The Syrian Arab Republic has used chemical weapons against its population at least 9 times, as demonstrated by independent OPCW and joint UN OPCW investigations. Yet, over 10 years after its accession to the Convention and the passing of Resolution 2118, it has failed to declare and destroy all its stockpiles. This is deeply troubling. Malta also condemns Daesh's reprehensible deployment of sulfur mustard during its siege to capture Maria in September 2015. This development of this unlawful chemical warfare agent and the delivery system by a terrorist group is concerning. In closing, President, we reiterate our strong condemnation for the use of chemical weapons by any actor under any circumstances. Furthermore, we reaffirm our full support for the OPCW and its technical teams. They carry out their mandate independently and impartially and in accordance with international standards. The Council should be united in recognizing this and refrain from casting any doubt on their work. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I wish to start by congratulating Japan on assuming the Council's presidency this month. I thank Guyana for steering the Council to a successful conclusion last month. China's position on chemical weapons-related issues is consistent. We sternly object to the use of chemical weapons by anyone under any circumstances for any purpose. We hope our world will soon become a chemical weapons-free world. I would like to share two observations on the Syrian chemical weapons issue. First, dialogue and negotiation. This provides the only solution to this issue. We welcome the two recent rounds of technical consultations between the Syrian government and the OPCW and the positive progress achieved on outstanding issues related to the initial declaration. We look forward to continuous constructive cooperation between the Technical Secretariat and the government on the basis of mutual respect and cooperation on an equal footing to create conditions for the settlement of the Syrian chemical weapons issue. Second, upholding the authority of the Chemical Weapons Convention. This is a fundamental guarantee for the settlement of this issue. It is imperative that the OPCW strictly comply with the requirements of the CWC and its verification annex, adhere to the principles of procedural compliance, reliable evidence, and credible conclusions in investigating and pursuing accountability for the alleged use of chemical weapons. A scant few countries without prior consultations, forced through a vote on and adoption of a new decision on the Syrian chemical weapons issue at the most recent Conference of the States Parties to the CWC. China finds this deeply concerning. We call on all parties to return to the tradition of consensus building to genuinely maintain the authority and effectiveness of the Convention. We also hope that the Director General and the Technical Secretariat can make tangible efforts to preserve the technical nature of the organization. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. Korea also joins in commending the successful role as presidency by Guyana, and would like to express our full support and cooperation for the success of the presidency by Japan. I would also like to thank Mr. Adeji Ebo, Director and Deputy to the High Representative, for his very informative briefing on this issue. Mr. President, this Council has given its priority in realizing a world free of chemical weapons, and the Republic of Korea strongly supports the continuous efforts of the OPCW to achieve that end. In this regard, the Republic of Korea welcomes the publication of the fourth report by the Investigation and Identification Team, IIT, of the OPCW, and commends its impartial and independent work. The Republic of Korea expressed grave concern over its findings that there are reasonable grounds to believe that the Daesh deployed a sulfur mustard, a chemical weapon, in artillery attacks against the town of Marea on September 1st, 2015. Against another case of possible use of chemical weapons in Syria, we reiterate our position that all those responsible for the use of chemical weapons must be held accountable. Mr. President, more than a decade has passed since Resolution 2118 was adopted unanimously in the wake of the use of chemical weapons in Gaza, Syria. However, we are deeply concerned that the issue has shown limited advancement over the past years. Although we welcome the recent 26th round of consultations between DAT, Declaration Assessment Team, and Syria, these consultations must move beyond mere routine meetings and yield tangible outcomes. For this, Syria must take full responsibility and provide the OPCW with scientifically plausible and verifiable explanation. 2 weeks ago, we received the latest report of the Director General of the OPCW on the progress in the elimination of chemical weapons in Syria, with explanation and amendments of the Syrian government on this issue. However, it is regrettable that there remains inconsistencies and discrepancies that needs to be addressed. Thus, we call on Syria to fully cooperate with the OPCW and to provide all the requested and the necessary information to the Secretariat. Mr. President, the use of chemical weapons can never be tolerated anywhere, at any time, and under any circumstances. In this light, the Security Council must act resolutely against any further use of chemical weapons by ensuring the full implementation of relevant Security Council resolutions, which include the complete destruction of chemical weapons in Syria. In this regard, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its steadfast commitment to holding the obligations under the Security Council resolutions as well as CWC, and stand ready to work with all Council members to address the Syrian issues. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Republic of Korea for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you, President. I'd like to begin by congratulating Guyana for excellently guiding our work in February. And I wish you and your delegation every success, and we assure you of our support as you carry out the work this month. My delegation is grateful for the briefing provided by Mr. Adedeji Ebo, Director and Deputy High Representative for Disarmament Affairs. Ecuador recognizes the efforts of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, and we welcome the completion of the 26th round of consultations between the OPCW Technical Secretariat, Declaration Assessment Team, and the Syrian National Authorities held on from the 23rd of January to the 1st of February 2024. This type of cooperation is the best way to achieve positive results, ensure accountability, and proper compliance with obligations under international law and relevant Security Council resolutions in the Syrian Arab Republic chemical weapons file. For that reason, I encourage Syrian authorities to continue to cooperate openly and transparently within a common understanding and through dialogue. Mr. President, we are concerned by the conclusions of the OPCW-ITT fourth report, which determined that there are sufficient grounds to believe that the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant used mustard agents during the attacks to capture the city of Maré on the 1st of September 2015. This is a reprehensible act, and there should be no impunity for those responsible. Moreover, acts of terrorism in all their forms, together with the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, are threats to international peace and security. Pursuant to Resolution 1540, adopted in 2004, states must adopt and apply necessary measures to keep non-state actors from acquiring, manufacturing, possessing, developing, transporting, transferring, or using weapons of mass destruction and their delivery systems, in particular for the purpose of terrorism. Threats of non-state agents, including those with terrorist goals who acquire and use weapons of mass destruction, do not recognize any borders, and therefore I reiterate the need for compliance with all obligations established in Resolution 1540. Distinguished colleagues, in conclusion, in recognizing the work of the OPCW and the integrity, professionalism, impartiality, objectivity, independence of its technical teams, Ecuador once again reiterates its rejection of the production and stockpiling of chemical weapons, and we condemn in the strongest terms their use by anyone, against anyone, anywhere, under any circumstances. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this joint statement on behalf of the A3+, namely Algeria, Guyana, Sierra Leone, and my own country, Mozambique. On behalf of the A3, we wish to convey our warmest congratulations to you, Mr. President, and to your country, Japan, for assuming the presidency of the Security Council for the month of March. We pledge our full support in the discharge of your heavy responsibilities. We pay tribute to Our Excellency Ambassador Caroline Rodriguez Birquet and the entire Team Guyana for the outstanding presidency of the Council in February. We thank Mr. Abede Ebo, Director and Deputy to the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs for his briefing. We welcome the participation in this meeting of the representatives of the Syrian Arab Republic, the Islamic Republic of Iran, and Turkey. Mr. President, we take note of the contents of the 125th monthly report of the OPCW covering the period from 24th January to 23rd February 2024. We also acknowledge the submission of the 123rd monthly report dated the 15th February 2024 on progress achieved by the Syrian Arab Republic regarding the destruction of its chemical weapons. The A3 encouraged the Secretariat to continue its effort to clarify the Syrian Arab Republic's declarations by addressing the identified gaps, inconsistencies, and discrepancies that remain unresolved. Additionally, we urge the Syrian Arab Republic to continue its cooperation by submitting the relevant explanations, documents, and amendments to the outstanding issues in accordance with the Chemical Weapons Convention. We note with appreciation the collaboration of the Syrian Arab Republic with the Secretariat, particularly for allowing the conduct of the 26th round of consultations in Damascus in January 2024, and for submitting explanations of the results of the analysis of samples collected by the declaration assessment at one of the declared sites. Mr. President, notwithstanding the recent encouraging developments, the A3+ remains concerned over the slow pace of progress in effort to close the Syrian Arab Republic's chemical weapons program. We reiterate our firm belief that the use of chemical weapons anywhere by anyone and under any circumstances must be condemned. Impunity for such a heinous crime under international law is not acceptable. The recent findings in the report of the OPCW investigation and the identification team indicate that there are reasonable grounds to believe that on 1st September 2015, during sustained attacks aimed at capturing the town of Maria, ISIL units deployed sulfur mustard using one or more artillery guns. These findings suggest that henceforth the Syrian chemical weapons program will be seen in a different perspective. DA3 expresses their grave concern over threats posed by acts of terrorism using chemical weapons in light of the deployment of such weapons by ISIL. In this regard, we urge the focal points of the two sides to expedite arrangements for a high-level meeting aimed at addressing the Syrian chemical weapons file based on the new findings from Maria. This would foster the needed momentum for the conclusive resolution on the outstanding issues and to ultimately speed up the process. The A3 Plus calls upon the Syrian Arab Republic to continue its collaboration with the OPCW obligations in line with Security Council Resolution 2118 of 2013 and the CWC to help in resolving protracted issues, to declare all chemical weapons and their production facilities in its possession, to organize the next round of consultations with the Declaration Assessment Team, and to solve the outstanding issues in order to definitely close this file. So, President, the A3 Plus remains committed to the imperative against the use of chemical weapons and all efforts aimed at prohibiting their development, production, acquisition, stockpiling, retention, transfer, or use. We reaffirm our continued support for the Security Council Resolution 2118. We wish to underscore the need for a definite closure of the issues pertaining to the Syrian chemical weapons program. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Let me, at the outset, congratulate you and Japan on assuming the presidency of the Council, and let me assure our full support during your presidency. Let me also thank Guyana for conducting a very calm presidency of the month of February. I would like to thank Deputy to the High Representative Ebo for his briefing. Mr. President, let me begin with a general message. The use of chemical weapons in the 21st century is unacceptable. To us, it feels almost anachronistic. Chemical weapons were used on the territory of Slovenia during the World War I, and we were unfortunately able to learn early on about their abhorrent effects. More concretely, the long-standing prohibition of chemical weapons has been challenged in recent years by their repeated use in the Syrian Arab Republic and elsewhere. Slovenia condemns in the strongest possible terms any use of chemical weapons by anyone. Such acts have devastating impacts on civilians and the environment, constitute a serious violation of international law, and those responsible for the use of the weapons should be held accountable. In this respect, Slovenia welcomes the work of the OPCW fact-finding mission in Syria and the Investigation and Identification Team. We are pleased with the diligent work of the IIT, which most recently brought clarity to the circumstances surrounding chemical weapons used by ISIL forces in the Syrian town of Maria in September 2015. Mr. President, we remain concerned by the many unanswered questions regarding chemical weapons in Syria. There are reasonable grounds to believe that despite verified destruction of declared chemical weapons stockpiles and production facilities, Syria has retained part of its chemical weapons program in violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. What is more, international investigation bodies have confirmed the use of chemical weapons by Syrian forces in 9 instances since Syria's accession to the Convention. This is unacceptable. We call on Syria to comply with its obligations under the Convention, declare all its chemical weapons production and research activities, destroy any remaining secret caches, and fully cooperate with the OPCW, including by providing unfettered access to sites, documents, and people needed to resolve all outstanding issues. Mr. President, I cannot emphasize enough the need to prevent the reemergence of the chemical weapons, and the attention of the Security Council is only logical. Slovenia believes only a multilateral approach with the CWC, OPCW, and international humanitarian law at its center can pave the way to a world free of chemical weapons. Mr. President, we take note of the position of the Russian Federation. The Security Council should use wisely its time and resources. Since Russian Federation doesn't want to be labeled as having double standards, we will remind them of this position as needed. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me first congratulate you on assuming the presidency and assure you of the full cooperation of my delegation. And thank you, Deputy Ibo, for your briefing and continued attention to this important issue. For 10 years, the United States, alongside most of the international community, has called out the Assad regime's repeated and ongoing violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention and Resolution 2118. We have condemned the regime's multiple, independently confirmed uses of chemical weapons against the Syrian people, and the regime's failure to fully declare and destroy its chemical weapons and production facilities. We will continue to pursue accountability for all who use chemical weapons. Recent reports by the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons are alarming. I urge all members of this Council to read the September 2023 OPCW report entitled Accession of the Syrian Arab Republic to the CWC, 10 Years On. This document provides a factual accounting of Syria's record of noncompliance with the CWC. The Director General's report on progress in the elimination of the Syrian CW program is equally concerning. Director General Arias's report comes on the heels of the decision taken by the OPCW Conference of the States Parties this past fall that for the first time invokes Article 12, Paragraph 3 of the CWC and recommends that state parties take certain, quote, collective measures, unquote, to prevent the transfer to Syria of dual-use chemicals and equipment. States parties must act to prevent such items from falling into the hands of the Assad regime and non-state actors, particularly terrorist groups. Colleagues, the United States fully supports robust implementation of this decision. We will be working toward that end and fully support a Security Council meeting this year to discuss its implementation. As is well documented in these OPCW reports, the Syrian regime continues to obfuscate and impede the work of the OPCW and its various technical teams that seek to fully engage with Syria in carrying out their mandates. Rather than address discrepancies in its own declaration or providing the OPCW with full substantive cooperation, Syria continues to delay and deflect and Syria's friends are politicizing the technical work of the organization. The recent findings by the OPCW Declaration Assessment Team heighten our concern that the Syrian regime retains a residual chemical weapons capability. We note with equal concern the February 22 report by the OPCW's Investigation and Identification Team, which concluded that there are reasonable grounds to believe that on September 1, 2015, during sustained attacks aimed at capturing the town of Maria, Daesh terrorists deployed sulfur mustard. The report finds that at least 11 individuals encountered liquid substances from projectiles fired by Daesh and experienced symptoms consistent with exposure to sulfur mustard. These findings are in line with the United States' own assessment of the attack. In finding Daesh ISIL responsible for these attacks, this report demonstrates that the IIT reports where the facts lead them, notwithstanding baseless claims of bias by members of this council and the Syrian regime. As the IIT itself noted, it applied the same methodologies and standards for this investigation as it has in all of its prior reports. We commend the independent, impartial, and expert work of the OPCW staff and condemn the use of chemical weapons anywhere by anyone under any circumstances. The report further illustrates the need for the OPCW to retain the IIT's unique investigative expertise, which plays a crucial role in upholding the global norm against the use of chemical weapons. The United States encourages the international community to strengthen cooperation in preventing the acquisition of chemical weapons by terrorists and make clear that there can be no impunity for the use of chemical weapons by anyone. Colleagues, the threat posed to Syrians and the international community by Syria's continuing noncompliance with the CWC and Council resolutions is alarming. We welcome the ongoing work of the OPCW as well as its report. We are committed to work with this Council in other multilateral fora and with partner countries to address this threat and ensure the Assad regime never again terrorizes the people of Syria with chemical weapons. Finally, Mr. President, let me say a few words in response to attacks that have been made by some on the professionalism and rigor of the investigative teams. We commend the OPCW's investigations of chemical weapons use in Syria. We continue to be impressed by the rigor of the OPCW brings to each of its investigative efforts, meticulously collecting and analyzing evidence from a multitude of sources to reach irrefutable conclusions. This important work is necessary so that those responsible for these attacks can be held to account. There can be no, repeat, no, impunity for chemical weapons use. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. President, I thank Mr. Ebo for his briefing. The proliferation of chemical weapons constitutes a threat to international peace and security that continues to require vigilance on the part of this Council. In the last 10 years, we have witnessed a worrying re-emergence of the use of chemical weapons, particularly in Syria. France determinedly supports the work of the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to work to eliminate these arms, to document cases of them being used, to identify the perpetrators, and to allow for accountability. France welcomes the latest report of the Investigation and Identification Team of the OPCW, which concludes that Daesh was responsible for the chemical attack perpetrated in Maria on the 1st of September 2015. Mustard gas dispersed on that day affected at least 11 people. That report, the result of considerable investigative work conducted independently and impartially, for the first time establishes the use of chemical weapons by a non-state actor. France will continue to support the OPCW in its efforts to combat chemical terrorism. In this regard, the existence of a framework for discussions on chemical terrorism within the OPCW is a useful platform to prepare the response of all states to this sort of attack. France also reaffirms its support for Security Council Resolution 1540, the 20th anniversary of which we will mark next month. This resolution is an essential instrument for preventing non-state actors from getting access to weapons of mass destruction. France condemns any use of chemical weapons, whenever, wherever, by whomever, and in any circumstances, be the perpetrators terrorist groups or states violating international commitments. In this regard, let's remember that the 3 previous reports of the investigative team demonstrated the responsibility of the Syrian regime for chemical attacks committed in Latamne in 2017, Sarakib, and in Douma in 2018. The Syrian regime has used chemical weapons against its own population, including after acceding to the Convention on the Prohibition of those weapons in 2013 and following the unanimous adoption by this Council of Resolution 2118. Since then, the Syrian regime should have renounced the use of these weapons and proceeded to the total destruction of its stocks. Syria has not answered the outstanding questions over its chemical weapons stocks. The OPC